The fact that we build dense housing next to freeways is an absolute scandal that doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, we can get a Surgeon General's warning on a pack of cigarettes or a container of alcohol, apparently, and I'm good with that. But if someone plops down an 8-story apartment building right next to a 12-lane freeway, it's crickets. And look, I talk about all kinds of things on this channel where if you really peel them apart and examine them, they're just outrageous. People sometimes ask me why my delivery is so laid back, and it's not just for effect, although I realize my narration skills are pretty scintillating. It's really because most of the time I'm just trying to keep my blood pressure from spiking. Like, urban freeways just make me insane. And part of what's in my head this week is that last April, I spent a lot of time in Minneapolis filming around I-94 and making the case for why transforming it into a boulevard is the best option. And now I find that that's the exact option the Minnesota DOT has decided to take off the table, despite tons of local support. You know, people talk about crime in our cities. You want to know what a crime is? Crime is intentionally shortening the lifespans of people who either can't afford housing that's away from freeways, or people who just simply don't understand the hazards of living near one. The average person doesn't have time to go looking for peer-reviewed research papers, so today I'm doing a thing that I think YouTube is good at, which is synthesizing what we know into a visual story that I hope drives the point home. Because research papers themselves are pretty dry, but make no mistake, once you start digging into this topic, I feel pretty confident saying there are hundreds, if not thousands of papers, all making basically the same point, which is that health risks from emissions and particulate matter are significantly elevated once you get within a block or two of a freeway. I mean, there are entire university research centers that are dedicated to this stuff. What I'm saying is, none of this is exactly well-publicized information, but it's out there and it is established. It's even acknowledged by the EPA, well, if this kind of information hasn't been scrubbed from government websites on January 20th, but they have a whole FAQ on near roadway air pollution and health impacts. Research findings indicate that roadways generally influence air quality. Man, influence is doing a lot of work there. Within 500 to 600 feet of heavily traveled roadways. Children, older adults, people with pre-existing cardiopulmonary disease, and people of low socioeconomic status also are among those at higher risk for health impacts from some air pollutants associated with traffic emissions. This is pretty understated language when you consider the health risks described in the academic literature, but at least it's acknowledged. When it comes to mitigations, there's a lot of patting themselves on the back for regulating vehicle emissions standards, but not much else in the way of mitigation recommendations. Certainly not, just not having freeways and dense housing next to each other. But it's the EPA, maybe it isn't in their silo. National politics is complicated, and it's a lot to ask for 50 states to agree on what actually constitutes factual information. So here's something a little more recent from a state that has a track record of dealing with air quality issues head on. It's a 2024 report from the California State Policy Evidence Consortium for the state legislature, and it uses the same term, near roadway air pollution, as the 2014 EPA document, often just using the acronym NRAP. And I just think it's telling that this is a phenomenon that's well enough established to have its own acronym. Any of these kinds of reports are going to have an introductory section where they go over the basics of NRAP, like listing the sources of traffic-related air pollution, tailpipes, brake, tire, and road wear, and resuspended roadway dust, and that last one's interesting, and I'm going to dig further into it later in the video. There's a list of all the pollutants that appear in higher concentrations near high-traffic roadways. Really disturbing, but it's basically the same list that comes up in all of the literature. And there's the customary list of all the health impacts of NRAP, which, I don't know if you need to see any more than all-cause mortality to get the picture. And the main reason I wanted to highlight this report, you probably only think of roadway-related air pollution when you're outside, but this is about the indoor effects of NRAP, and they estimate that 30 to 90% of the pollutant concentrations indoors are from outdoor sources, and that values at the higher end tend to be in locations where there are higher concentrations of outdoor pollutants. And this is one of the big points I want to make. Having housing near high traffic roadways isn't bad just because sometimes you have to go outside to walk or bike somewhere. It's also extremely bad if you're indoors too. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but the conclusions and recommendations section is a bit disappointing. It's vehicle technology and fuel emissions standards, building walls along roadways, and better air filtration in residential units. So basically a list of expensive, cumbersome interventions that keep the state's beloved freeways sacrosanct. I think because of the prevalence of driving culture and the housing supply crisis, California is more invested in this issue than any other state, so let's stay here with the Air Quality and Land Use Handbook from the State EPA and Air Resources Board. This one also sets things up with a litany of all the health impacts of near roadway air pollution. Reduced lung function, increased asthma, bronchitis, more medical interventions. This is from 2005, and the recommendation is to avoid citing new sensitive land uses within 500 feet of a freeway where a sensitive land use is defined as, well, schools and daycares and medical facilities, of course, but also just housing. The problem, again, though, is the recommendations and the total lack of policy teeth. These recommendations are advisory. Land use agencies have to balance other considerations, including housing and transportation needs, economic development priorities, and other quality of life issues. I would just say that anytime you see the words balance other considerations, what you have is actually not a policy at all. And you're still just going to get the status quo, and I don't think the 20 years since this guidance was published have proven me wrong. But here's what I think is the centerpiece of this whole topic. A Los Angeles Times piece written by Tony Barboza and John Schlois, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, from 2017, a long-forgotten, glorious time when our great cities had flagship newspapers that did actual journalism in the public interest. And I love that, unlike government-funded research reports, the headline just puts it as bluntly as possible. LA keeps building near freeways, even though living there makes people sick. The population near Los Angeles freeways is growing faster than elsewhere in the city as planners push developers to concentrate new housing near transportation hubs. This goes to a whole issue that I've discussed repeatedly on this channel, which is that our regional planners often decide to locate high-capacity transit alignments along freeway corridors because it's cheaper and it's more palatable to NIMBYs, but this is the planned outcome: more dense housing right next to freeways. And I realize I'm probably on thin ice here by suggesting that there's anywhere in any of our high-demand cities where we shouldn't be building dense housing. But just understand, what I'm really saying is the housing itself is fine. It's just that instead of it being next to freeways, it should be next to more dense mixed-use housing. The article talks about the fact that the city has well-intentioned planning guidance around the development of housing within 1,000 feet of a freeway, and that guidance acknowledges all the well-established links to negative health outcomes from people living in that kind of proximity. But it's all in the form of an advisory notice. It's not a prohibition or a moratorium, so it has no teeth at all, and it has some of the same squishy language. Considering the unique circumstances of each case, which to me is equivalent to not having a code or policy at all. And I sort of get it. Near roadway air pollution is not really a black and white categorical thing. There isn't a clear-cut answer to the question of how much is too much, but at a minimum, it's one of those things where when you get older and you're thinking, what could I have done differently in my life to get one more good year? One of those things could very well be, I shouldn't have lived next to a freeway. Some of the impacts are more immediate though, especially for higher risk people. Like the chairman of pediatrics the LA Times reporters talked to, who said that children who live near freeways are the ones who most frequently end up in the emergency room struggling to breathe. These kids will come in 4, 5, 6 times over a 6-month period, and clearly their environment is a factor. I feel for these families because they suffer an undue burden of illness simply because of where they live. It really is a great piece of journalism, and you get all kinds of priceless quotes from LA officials about how restricting growth near freeways is impractical because, well, it's LA and everything is near freeways. Or as the president of the Downtown Center Business District puts it, Freeways are part of Los Angeles fabric, and prohibiting housing by them is unrealistic. LA's fabric? Man, I just can't emphasize enough that if people's mental models of your city are dominated by freeways and car dependency, it's not a compliment. It shouldn't be like this, but we're very much pricing at-risk folks right into areas where they're the most vulnerable. And I'm just going to redo this next bit while I fly over the location in question. Low rent and a location near shops and restaurants are what brought Jeremiah Caleb to an apartment on Beloit Avenue, where a sound wall is all that separates the 405 freeway from sleek new apartments and lofts advertising good living. But life got worse for Jeremiah and his wife Angel soon after moving into that one bedroom on the west side of Los Angeles. The couple began to struggle with bouts of coughing, sneezing, and headaches. They kept the windows shut, yet a grimy black film settled regularly over the furniture, counters, and even their skin, a never-ending reminder of the vehicle exhaust and soot they were breathing just 100 feet from 14 lanes of traffic. "We were constantly sick," said Caleb, an actor in his 30s. The couple worried enough about dirty air that they put off having children. "We were desperate to leave, but we felt stuck. We just couldn't afford it." This is all just nauseating, but it's all just very well reported, and they do come back with this story at the end of the piece. Back on the west side of Los Angeles, Jeremiah Caleb, who spent years battling black road dust and illness while living in an apartment next to the 405, said he and his wife were relieved when she landed a nursing job, a second income that allowed them to move to a less polluted neighborhood about a mile from any freeway. Their health improved, with their once constant headaches and respiratory problems now a rarity. "I can leave my doors open and I'm breathing fresh air all the time," he said. "We got lucky, but for most people, they're stuck because that's what they can afford." And I wonder if maybe the reason this issue doesn't get the traction that I feel like it should is that it's considered a poor people problem. Near roadway air pollution is something professional class people can buy their way out of. And, well, compromised health and low life expectancy are for working class people. There's more to cover, and I regret to inform you that this isn't just about freeways, so we will talk about that. I think I'm done promoting this New York event with the war on cars since it looks like we're at capacity, but I'm happy to do similar events in other cities. I'm just not an event organizer by any stretch. So if you have that skill, my contact information is down in the description. Okay, I hope that at some point over the course of today's video, you have come to the conclusion that living near freeways is something you should try to avoid if you have the choice. Unfortunately though, freeways aren't the whole story. Here's the last piece of research I'm going to share. It's near road traffic related air pollution, resuspended PM 2.5, so fine particulate matter under 2.5 micrometers, from highways and arterials. And this is from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. This one's important, I think, because we tend to think of near roadway air pollution as coming from the vehicles themselves. So tailpipe emissions, particles from tire wear, particles from brake pad wear. But there's this whole other category that isn't immediately intuitive, which is that loose materials of all kinds, chemicals, plastics, disintegrated pavement, get kicked up into the air or resuspended when traffic moves along a roadway. The paper concedes that tailpipe emissions have improved over time, probably thanks to regulations that certainly won't be rolled back by the incoming administration. However, current non-exhaust emissions from road vehicles are unabated, making the contribution of resuspended road dust to traffic-related particulate matter even more significant, which probably isn't helped by the fact that the average vehicle on our roadway keeps getting heavier and more damaging. The paper gets into all kinds of stuff about how vehicle emissions are modeled, pretty interesting if you want to nerd out, and says that the inclusion of resuspended dust in the emission and dispersion modeling chain increases prediction of near-road PM 2.5 concentrations by up to 74%. But it's what this paper has to say about near roadway air pollution along arterials that really stuck with me. Increases in PM 2.5 emission rates due to resuspended dust were considerably higher than the sum of tailpipe exhaust, brake wear, and tire wear emissions on arterials. These are areas where human exposure can be more important than areas near highways, as people tend to live, work, and congregate near many arterials. Yes, we do tend to build our dense housing along arterials, and yeah, it's often where the transit service is, but it's also where the most airborne pollutants are, not to mention noise and traffic violence. Again, there's just reams of peer-reviewed research on all this stuff, and yeah, maybe LA still has squishy policy language around the citing of sensitive land uses, like places where people actually live, but it's LA. Certainly a super progressive city like Seattle has all of this figured out, so let's check in on the city's comprehensive plan. Promote the development of new multifamily dwellings in properly zoned areas that will buffer neighborhood residential areas from the commercial core, freeway, and commercial corridors. This one's specific to the Roosevelt district, and a quick flyover of the Link Station area will confirm that, yes, nearly all of the dense housing has been built within a block or two of I-5. It's like the city is saying, if you can't afford a single family home, or if you're just the type of person who doesn't prefer to live in one, then not only are you a second-class citizen, but we're going to use you as a human shield for the people we actually do care about. I could go on at length about the Seattle Comprehensive Plan. Don't get me started. Anyway, all this was about localized impacts of freeways and high-volume arterials. The macro impacts like climate change are obviously important too, and the wildfires in LA started breaking out as I was researching and writing this video, which did have a lot of LA material in it, so very strange timing. My only parting thought is there are a lot of aspects of LA that I really like, but at some point we're going to have to let go of the idea that freeways are integral to that city's identity and function. I'd just note that if you look at the cities that perennially top the list of the world's most livable, they all have one thing in common. They don't have freeways anywhere near the city center. Just a thought. You need kind of a dark sense of humor to even joke about climate change these days, and if you watch my channel, you know I'm not a big meme guy. They can be kind of cheap and reductive, but internet memes are a huge part of the online discourse around just about any political topic. So I think it's important to stay on top of them, even if they aren't your cup of tea. And luckily for me, there's a great video that puts all the most common climate memes in easily digestible and funny tier list form. I'm talking about the 2024 Climate Meme Roundup from the channel Our Changing Climate. My personal favorite is advantages of self-driving cars, except it's really all the benefits of trains, like can use special tunnels that help you avoid congested roadways. Anyway, the channel's commentary on all these memes is insightful and hilarious, and I kind of feel like if you enjoy what I do on my channel, you're gonna enjoy Our Changing Climate too. The 2024 Climate Meme Roundup is a Nebula Plus video and exclusive to the platform. So you might realize that there are lots of great urbanism-related creators on Nebula, like Not Just Bikes, Stuart Hicks, and City Beautiful, whose incredible Great Cities series I've strongly recommended in the past, and you should definitely watch. But what you might not know is that Nebula has a bunch of great creators who focus on climate, like Climate Town, Simon Clark, and Our Changing Climate, and a lot of these creators have content you can only find on Nebula. And that's because Nebula gives us the freedom and the resources to get ambitious and experimental with styles and subject matter that might not get as much traction on other video sharing platforms. So if you want to support this channel's ability to grow, improve, and keep experimenting with new ideas, signing up for Nebula really is the best possible way to do that. And remember, when you sign up, it's not only an investment in our community of creators, it's also an investment in continuing to make the Nebula streaming experience itself better and better. Because yes, Nebula is kind of like Netflix for people who are a little too into trains, but it really is a haven for content that's a little more thoughtful with a pretty big idea behind all of it. raising the level of the entire platform and growing it into a prestige streaming service. So if you use my custom link down in the description, it is an amazing value. You get all the Nebula content for 40% off the regular price when you sign up for an annual subscription, so $36 or $3 a month. And the lifetime offer is definitely worth pondering. $300, you pay once and you get Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exist. And Nebula subscribers now get guest passes, 1 every month or 3 per quarter if you're on annual or lifetime. Once active, guests can binge all the Nebula content they want for a week, and no payment information is required. So tons of ways to share and enjoy Nebula, and no matter which way you go, a Nebula membership is a great way to demonstrate your support for a one-of-a-kind creator-owned platform, and to fund the continued production of amazing originals, and there's great new stuff hitting the platform all the time. So my recommendation, use my custom link to get Nebula for 40% off. That's $36 a year or $3 a month. It's nebula.tv/CityNerd, and then just go and watch the 2024 Climate Meme Roundup right now. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons whose direct support allows me to follow my muse and just talk about the things that I thought were important to share from week to week. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.